It probably feels like the past year, more than a lot of other places and times in our lives, there's a lot of circumstances outside of our control. And yet I can choose my attitude about that. You know, I can either choose to find the silver lining, I can choose to be optimistic, I can choose to be hopeful about things, or I can choose to kind of grovel in the circumstances or feel like I'm a victim to the things that are happening around me. And my attitude really determines a lot about how I can move forward.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to 3 Words, a bite-sized podcast about the simple and significant choices that all of us can make in order to become the very best version of ourselves. My name is Dr. Michael Brown. I am the host of 3 Words, and I'm here today with a common podcast friend, none other than Nick Gillispie, leader, mentor, thought leader. You've been on this 3 Words podcast before, my friend. We were just chatting off camera, and we have known each other since 2000, since the turn of the century, 21 years. So thank you for being here with us today in the studio, in this conversation. Would you do the honors of what are our 3 words?
Yeah, so today we're talking about accept the consequences.
Accept the consequences. You know, it's interesting. I have 9 children. You have several of your own, and my kids don't like the notion of consequences, right? Like, whoever wants to say, oh, I accept the consequences of my choices. But here's really the conversation today, and I'd love for you to kind of kick us off after this thought. What if every choice, if we saw every choice as either having a positive or negative consequence attached to it, that there are no freebie choices? What are your thoughts about that, Nick?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree. We don't live in a vacuum. There's no single choice, single action, single thought or attitude that we have that just exists outside of the rest of our person and the rest of our relationships and like reality. And we have to be able to come to grips with the fact that while we live in a world where oftentimes things are kind of thrust upon me, I still make my choices and I choose my path forward into things, out of things. And in that sense, I can control my own destiny.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting too, particularly in this culture. There's a couple things as I work with a variety of professionals as well as in higher education and even my own children. We love freedom. We want to be able to make whatever choices we want. And there's also this radical individualism that I don't want people to tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. So you mix this idea of freedom to make whatever choices I want, individualism that you don't tell me what I need to do or what I should do. But then when things don't go well, we don't necessarily want to own it. So we want 100% ownership of our choices without actually accepting the consequences or the outcomes of our choices. I was thinking even, as I work on the college campus, and particularly in this day and age where it seems like people are really tired. And we are in the middle of hopefully at the tail end of a global pandemic, but we're in this situation where people are more weary than ever. And I hear all the time, I am so tired today. And in many ways, the choices we made as to when we go to bed the night before determines in many ways the consequence of how I feel today. And we could think about this in a variety of realms. And yet we need to own our consequences, not just own our choices.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think, again, mentioning the global pandemic, it probably feels like the past year, more than a lot of other places and times in our lives, there's a lot of circumstances outside of our control. And yet I can choose my attitude about that. I can either choose to find the silver lining. I can choose to be optimistic. I can choose to be hopeful about things, or I can choose to kind of grovel in the circumstances or feel like I'm a victim to the things that are happening around me. And my attitude really determines a lot about how I can move forward. I mean, mentioning college students, like I remember, several years ago, having a conversation with a college student who had just failed out of school, couldn't come back, multiple semesters of just poor grades. And when we were talking about it, he was, this professor did this and this class was, organized in this way. And I didn't get these things. And I just kind of was like, well, yeah, but did you go to class? Well, usually, I skipped sometimes. Well, how often did you skip? Well, I skipped, probably, every other week or every third week. How much of the reading did you get done? Why didn't you do any of the reading? And he really didn't want to see that he was the one that failed himself out of school. And as we got into it, it really was he didn't make the right choices in order to succeed in class. And he had to own that. He needed to take that with him. And I think the success for that young man was that he did. Like the next institution he went to, changed things around, began to be more responsible, made the better choices, got out of school. But he had to, bite the bullet that he got himself to where he was at.
Well, he chose the freedom. We're talking about freedom, but he had the freedom to choose not to go to class because going to class isn't always fun.
No one's making you. Yeah.
Yeah. And he chose to not read because I'm sure there was a lot of more enjoyable activities he could take that he could be involved in as opposed to reading the assignments. And yet he was struggling with accepting the consequences. I was thinking about this even as you were sharing the story because I've worked in higher ed for a while, and it is very rare when a student comes to me, or even quite honestly, when a professional comes to me, a student comes to me and says, hey, I failed a class. It's always someone else's fault, the professor, the syllabus, whatever. But even professionals, when they come to me and they got fired, they get fired from a job, they can't believe that they got fired. And as you begin to examine their work ethic, as you begin to examine the quality of their product, and are they all in when they're at work? Oftentimes they're not, but there's a sense of, I want the freedom to do what I want. Yep. I want the freedom to live the way I want, but I don't want to accept the consequences of that. So if I want to go to bed really, really late, the consequences are the next day I might be tired. Yeah. If I want to eat anything I want, Nick, we're not as young as we used to be. So if we went out at midnight.
It takes a little bit longer to burn off those calories.
That's right.
For sure.
Well, not only that, but if we went out at midnight and ate a pound of the spiciest wings ever, that's the freedom to make that choice. Yeah. But then the next day we might use the term hem and haw or complain or kind of whine about the fact that I'm not feeling well. I need to accept the consequences of my choices financially. Let's be specific about that. We want the freedom to spend as we want, to buy anything we want, to charge that credit card. And then we are so frustrated and oftentimes finger pointing when we've hit poverty or when we can't pay our bills. And we tend to not accept the consequences that come with the freedom. We want 100% ownership of our choices without taking ownership for the results of those very choices. So even what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, every choice has a consequence. Now, some are negative, some are positive, and some are somewhere in the middle. But let's just say, and let's just own this notion and really embrace it, that there are no freebies, and just own that.
Yeah. I think along with accepting the consequences, I think we have desired futures that we want. And the choices I make today are either moving me into that future or not moving me into that future. I was talking to a friend of mine who he just, him and his cousin had a startup company and it's going really well. But my friend is the one that really kind of is a majority owner. And his cousin, who kind of is in it with him and helped kind of get the business off the ground, wants more responsibility. But my friend was like, I can't give him more responsibility because he shows up to work assignments late. Like he shows up early. I don't get purchase orders in on time. He's like, all the basic things I ask him to do when we've had conversations, he doesn't do it. And so I can't give him more responsibility. And I think sometimes we're frustrated by our circumstance.
Yeah.
Why doesn't my boss entrust me with more? Why don't I get that promotion? And so I need to look in the mirror and say, might I be actually creating my own reality?
Yes.
With my decisions.
Well, and we do. We are the life that we're living today. We have chosen our way into. And you're correct, Nick. There are circumstances outside of us that we can't control, but we always have 100% control of the response to those circumstances. But for the most part, if we are feeling tired, we've chosen our way there. If we are succeeding in school, we've chosen our way there. If our relationships are healthy or unhealthy, we've chosen our way into those situations. And I know how freeing it is. And that's really the focus of this conversation, how freeing it is to look in the mirror and to accept the consequences for our choices. Because when we do that, we're now empowered.
Yep.
Because if I don't have to accept the consequences, I'm disempowered. I don't have any control over the future that I want, the bright future that I'm desiring. So, and even as I've worked with you over the years, you've been so teachable. And obviously we worked on teams together, and there's times we've had some hard conversations.
We've had some hard conversations for sure. I've learned a lot from you about accepting my own choices.
And you as well have come to me and said, Michael, the way you're leading in this situation, the conversation you're having, and I've noticed this in your life. And we, even in our relationship over the last 20 years, have had to have some of those conversations where as you come to me or I come to you, we have choices to make. Mm-hmm. We can point to all the things outside of us as to why this is true, or we can own it.
Yeah.
If even the team that I was leading with you on it, if the team is unhappy, I need to take ownership for that. That in some way is a result of the way that I'm leading that team. Mm-hmm. And so I need to own those. But when I own and accept the consequences, I can actually make changes. Mm-hmm. I can make different choices that will produce different consequences, hopefully healthy consequences.
And the desired future, I think, that we want to arrive at. When we were conversing about this before we kind of started this, I mean, you had even mentioned kind of my pathway into a circumstance is also my pathway out of it. Yes, there's things outside of my control that have been a part of leading me to where I'm at. But also when I recognize what are the decisions that I've made to get me to where I'm at, if I can come to grips with those and accept those things, then they can actually be the thing that help me actually make alternate choices in the future. As I am where I am and accept where I am, I can see the future. Hey, here's where I want to go. Mm-hmm. And now my choice is, what is the best next step, the best wise next step for me in order to begin to change the outcomes that I want in my life?
I appreciate that. If you're listening today and even viewing on our YouTube channel, you might feel stuck. You might feel stale. There might be struggles that are going on in your life. And maybe like even Nick and I talked about, you have a choice to make. We can blame, we can make excuses, or we can accept the consequences of the choices that we have made. And really, in many ways, as you accept the consequences and you accept the situation you're in today, you can choose something different. So I really enjoyed this conversation with you, Nick. And I just want to say to our viewers and our listeners, would you think about your life and the life that you're living today, and even the place where you find yourself today, and accept the consequences of your choices? For life coaching, consulting services, or to hire a keynote speaker, please visit dmbcoaching.com.